Hi, I'm Karen and I'm one of the pastors at Lesmurdie Baptist Church. Thank you for joining us for this message. What you will experience is part of our regular service, and if you would like to join us for a full service at either 9:30 or 5 on a Sunday, please just type lbc.online.church into your web browser.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. Oh, my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. My sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open. 'Cause when you called my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope the kids are settled. I know I've already seen you a little earlier in this service, but I forgot to introduce myself then, so let me say hi again. My name's Karen. I'm one of the pastors here at LBC. Now, we've already started thinking in this service, and we're going to continue thinking as we go into the message about what it means to be really present in the relationships and circumstances that we find ourselves in, how we can follow the words and the works and the ways of Jesus in the relationships that we find ourselves in our everyday. And we're going to do that by looking at one particular story, the story of Jesus meeting a woman at a well. And let's just imagine the scene to get ourselves in the right headspace. So, as I said, it's a story that takes place around the well. It's actually Jacob's well, and it's just outside a town in Samaria. And in fact, it was a spring that had been tapped. And as people were in the habit of doing, a short stone wall had been built around the mouth of the well, and a stone lid put on top just to stop people and animals and too much dirt accidentally finding its way into the well. There would have been a stone trough not far from the mouth of the well that was used to put water in for animals, and quite possibly there was a tripod arrangement over the well, so a rope and a bucket could be hung on that and used to get water out of the well. So Jesus arrives at this well at about lunchtime. His friends had gone into town to look for some food. They were all tired. They'd had a really long walk already that day. Jesus plogs himself down on this low wall around the well. He's tired and he's hot and he's thirsty. And he sets himself up in a place to actually kind of get in the way of a woman, a Samaritan woman, who comes to the well to collect water. Now, she's coming at lunchtime, which is an unusual time of day for the women in that day to collect the water. They'd normally do that earlier on in the morning, but this particular woman wasn't well liked or well received in her community, so she chose the heat of the day to come out to the well and collect water where she wouldn't be disturbed by other people. So she's come to the well at this quieter time of day. You can imagine her discomfort at seeing that somebody was right there, sitting right on the edge of the well. So we're going to pick up the story. You can find it in John chapter 4. We're going to pick it up from verse 7. But Jesus, sitting on the edge of this well wall, he says to her, "Please give me a drink." So this woman, who on seeing him there would have been feeling very uncomfortable, is now very, very surprised. In verse 9 we read, "The woman was surprised, for not only did men rarely speak to women in public, but Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. So she said to Jesus, 'You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?'" Now, a little later in this story, the woman's surprise is echoed by the disciples. They come back and they find Jesus talking to this Samaritan woman, and the story says that they were shocked. They were really shocked to find him talking to this woman, but none of them had the nerve to ask what was actually going through their heads, which was, "What do you want with her?" Or, "Why are you talking with her?" Anyway, so Jesus had asked for a drink. The woman is astounded, and Jesus says, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." Okay, so this woman now is in a situation where she thinks this strange Jew, who's already broken so many social norms and clearly does not have a bucket or a rope, is offering her water from some sort of source that he's suggesting is better than this well of her ancestor Jacob. And, he talks about living water, which was a phrase that would have meant to this woman the idea of some fresh water, or water from a fresh stream, or water from a place where the water was running and certainly hadn't been sitting still and wasn't stagnant. And she would have known there was no such place around nearby where they were. So she speaks to him again, and I love this woman's boldness. She may have been a Samaritan and a woman, and as we will find out a little later, a person of dubious reputation, but she's not afraid to ask questions, the questions that many people were thinking, even Jesus' own disciples, as we find out a little later in the story, but they're too afraid to ask, but she's not afraid to ask them. And so she says to him, "But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket, and this well is very deep. So where would you get this living water?" And besides, she gets a bit protective of her heritage now. Do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed? Now, at this point in the story, Jesus makes it clear that he's not actually talking about water that you could pour into a glass and take a drink of. He's not talking about water that can be collected in a bucket. He's talking about the new life that he has come to offer everyone, the new life that is going to be made possible when he goes to the cross and dies and is resurrected again and defeats death. He's talking about living water in terms of this new life. And Jesus replies to her, anyone who drinks this water from the well will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. That's a beautiful image, isn't it? Now, the woman doesn't exactly know what Jesus is talking about at this point still, but she is somehow drawn to him. And that reminds me of what we were talking about last week, about this idea of people being discipled to faith, discipled to conversion, discipled to understanding. She wants to know, and she wants to experience more of Jesus. So she says, please, sir, give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water. Well, clearly she still is grappling to understand what he's talking about. So she asks for some of this water. And then rather abruptly, it seems, things take a turn and get much more serious in this conversation. As Jesus says to her, as I say, seemingly rather abruptly, I'll go and get your husband. And she responds, well, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says back to her, well, you're right. You don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth. Now here we are at the bit that explains why this woman was collecting water alone in the heat of the day. There's a lot we don't know about the backstory, I guess, to what is playing out here. We don't know the details, and the assumption is, from what we can read here, that this woman has had a number of marriages, perhaps formal marriages, perhaps they were informal relationships, and that these have ended in divorce. So it doesn't appear that she was widowed these 5 times. These have ended in divorce rather than death of husbands. We don't know how badly she was treated in any of these marriages. We don't know how much she was to blame. We don't know how much responsibility she took in the breakdown of these relationships. We certainly know nothing about her childhood or her early life, which might give us any understanding to what she took into relationships that made them hard for her to maintain. Although it's a pretty fair assumption to say that these many relationships, which she was in part responsible for as far as their breakdown, with the passing of each one, it must have been much harder to find success in the next relationship, and so on and so on. I can imagine that the wind must have been knocked out of the woman at this point. This, as I say, was quite an abrupt change in their conversation. But again, you've got to admire her feistiness. She recovers super quickly, and she makes that classic deflection move, which many of us use when we find ourselves in an uncomfortable situation or faced with a question we don't want to answer. Our brains quickly scan around for something topical, something controversial, something that will take the heat off us in that moment. And she thinks about what's going on, and she introduces to Jesus the question about the religious debate that was going on at the time between the Samaritans and the Jews. And Samaritans saying that they had a holy mountain where God was present, and the Jews saying, no, we've got the temple and that's where God is present. But Jesus has a counter of his own to the woman's attempt to sidetrack the conversation. And he makes it pretty clear to her that the debate over God's presence is nothing to do with geography. It's not about a mountain. It's nothing to do with architecture. It's not about the temple, not about a building. Now that in itself would have been puzzling for the woman. This idea that true worship or the presence of God wasn't associated with a particular place or with particular territory, that would have been very puzzling for her. And I can't help but wonder if the next thing she says is her attempt to bring this whole unusual conversation, unusual interaction to an end. And she says to Jesus, "I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." I think it's a bit like she was trying to bring an end to this whole confusing conversation by saying, okay, there's a whole pile of stuff we don't know and maybe don't agree on here, but let's wait. I'm sure the Messiah is coming. Let's wait and see what he has to say about this. And then, of course, Jesus responds and says, "Well, I am the Messiah." And at this point, something shifts in the woman's head and heart. And she believed, or perhaps it's better to say she took a major step towards beginning to believe. And we read in verse 38, she left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" So the people came streaming from the village to see him. Many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, "He told me everything I ever did." When they came out to see him, they begged him to stay in their village. So he stayed for 2 days, long enough for many more to hear his message and believe. And then they said to the woman, "Now we believe, not just because of what you told us, but because we have heard him ourselves. Now we know that he is indeed the Saviour of the world." I really love what this story shows us about how we can be present in the everyday relationships and circumstances of our lives. And to help us capture what we can learn from Jesus here, I want to show you a diagram that's going to be up on the screen. It's been shared with a small group of us here at LBC who are meeting fortnightly to think about how we can become a church that has a discipling culture, with that idea of being people who disciple others to faith, and ourselves are discipled to faith, and then continue that discipleship journey beyond that point of faith as well. So you'll see this square on the screen. Last week we had an in, up, out triangle. This week we've got a square that I'm going to call the intentional conversation square. Okay, so let's think back about the story we've just read about Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. Did you notice in the story how Jesus started the whole interaction with casual conversation? Although I guess, to be fair, it probably didn't feel that casual to the woman because, you know, she was a Samaritan, he was a Jew, she was a woman, he was a man, she was a woman of disrepute and so on, but you'll hopefully get my point. He's at the well, she comes along to collect water and he asks her for a drink. That's kind of an everyday, normal, casual sort of interaction to have. And most of us can do that sort of conversation, can't we? You know, it's the "how is your day going" question that you might ask if you meet another mum at the playground, or you might ask if you sit down next to someone on the bus, or in this COVID era, sit down 1.5 metres across from someone on the bus. "Hi, how's your day going" is the sort of question you might ask of a colleague as you step into the lunchroom. And it's almost the sort of conversation we can engage in without thinking. But I want to suggest... Hey everyone, it's Karen here from the post-production room. That wind really knocked us for six. Didn't feel quite that bad at the time, but when we came to have a listen, it was pretty hard to hear what I was saying. So here's what I was trying to say. I was trying to highlight that although Jesus was very casual in his conversation with the woman, it was very intentional. He was very purposeful about that casual introduction to conversation with the woman. And that's the top side of the square, the first side, the top side of the square that we're going to be looking at today, that idea of starting out with casual conversation with people. Okay, let's get back to where I was before the wind came in on us. Okay, Now, when you think back to the story of the woman in the well, or not in the well, she was not in the well, the woman and the well, and Jesus sitting on the edge of the well, did you notice when the conversation moved from something that you would call casual into something you might call meaningful? When did the conversation start to get a little bit more significant? Then when did it start to get to be a little bit more consequence than just, hi, how are you going? When I look at the story, I think that happened when Jesus offered the woman a drink of living water. I reckon that took the conversation into a more meaningful, a more significant place. And if you think about that, moving a conversation from casual to meaningful, it's a little bit like taking that, hey, hi, how's your day going question that you might have, or conversation you might have with a mum in the playground or a fellow worker, and taking it to another level by asking them an intentional question. And a really good, intentional, meaningful question in this day and age for us might be something like, hey, how are you finding this whole COVID-19 experience? And that's the right-hand side of the square. So we've got casual at the top. The right-hand side of the square, this intentional conversation square, is about moving a conversation to something that is meaningful conversation. And then that brings us down to the bottom of the square and a dimension that is labelled spiritual. So when you have a look at the conversation between Jesus and the woman at the well, when do you think it moved into out of meaningful into something that you might call spiritual? When did it turn to matters of faith? I think that happened somewhere when the conversation turned to a discussion about God's presence. The argument over, was God present on the holy mountain or present in the holy temple? And for us, our conversations, they can move from meaningful to spiritual. Perhaps when we say, we've done the hi, how's your day going? We've moved into the meaningful. I think I got myself confused there. We're talking now about moving from casual, meaningful, and into spiritual. They can go into the spiritual place when we take that, how have you found the last few months? And actually start talking together about the different ways that we might have managed the pandemic, or dealt with anxiety, or dealt with changes to our routine or income or relationships. So let me give you an example. A conversation might have moved into something spiritual when you say to your workmate or to the person you're chatting with in the playground, for me in this whole season, it's my faith and also my connection, my relationships with my local faith community, my local church that has really helped me, because I've had other tough times in my life when my father died, or I lost my job, or I had depression, and it was my relationship with God and my relationship with other people who follow Jesus that really helped me through that time, and it's given me confidence to face the tough stuff we're going through now. The conversation's gone into a spiritual space when there's opportunity for the other person to hear that and perhaps say back to you, I've never really had a faith experience, or I've never really thought about God as a personal being in that way. And then you go back and forth, to and fro, with discussion about faith and belief and spirituality together. Okay, so casual, meaningful, spiritual. And then we have the fourth side of the square, and that's called discovery. That is really the breakthrough moment. So when do you see that happened in the conversation between Jesus and the woman? I guess we'd all agree that it was around that moment when Jesus told her that he was the Messiah, and she believed, or at least she started to believe, that this was the truth. And she rushed back to tell the rest of the village what she had found out. That is her discovery moment, or at least it's the very beginning of her discovery experience. So this conversation that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman was very intentional. It was intentional in his casual engagement. It was then very intentional as he deliberately offered her something, the living water conversation that took the conversation to a meaningful level. And then, of course, Jesus took the conversation to a spiritual level when he talked about God's presence. And finally, the conversation moved into that discovery dimension. Okay, so 2 words of caution that I have. The first is that I want to say that the idea of this square is not to suggest that, you should use this as a conversation formula that you're going to apply in every single session conversation you have with either a complete stranger or someone you know. It's not a matter of going to the playground or hopping on the bus and saying, right, I'm going to go from intentionally being in casual conversation right through to discovery with this person that I've chosen to talk to in this one session. I think, in fact, Jesus did model all four elements of this sort of intentional conversation in his one interaction with the woman at the well, but that is an unusual circumstance and not the idea of what this is all about. So that's the first word of caution. Don't think that you can, or even that you need to work through all aspects of this conversation. It's intentional conversation in one sitting. I think that'll end up with all sorts of troubles if you take it away and try and apply it like that. And the second word of caution is actually really kind of similar, a little different. This intentional conversation square is not a formula. It's not something that can be laid down, applied artificially or from a distance or where you don't have relationship. Neither is it like a genie in a lamp. If I just follow the four sides of the square, I'm going to end up in a certain place. It's not that. It's not a formula. It's not a surefire, if you do this, then this will be the outcome. But what it is, I think, is a really helpful way of describing and remembering how we can be intentional in our conversations in a way that reflects the words and the works and the ways of Jesus. Just like we had the up, in, out triangle of last week, I want to offer you this square this week as a way of remembering how we can live so that our lives do reflect the words of Jesus, the works of Jesus, and the ways of Jesus. And I think having intentional conversations like Jesus did is actually one of the best ways we can be present in the circumstances and relationships that we find ourselves in, that good friendship that we spoke about from the article that Michael O'Neill wrote. We mentioned that at the beginning of the service today. I think it's one of the ways we can really connect with people, even though we might find ourselves physically constrained or restrained as far as gathering together goes. And on a personal note, I have found the idea of intentional conversation around these four sides of a square really, really helpful. It's like the awareness of this has actually given me freedom to go into conversations in a different way. How can I describe some of the ways that's happened? One thing is I'm no longer underestimating the beauty and the opportunity of being intentional about casual conversation. Very easy to let opportunities and moments for that go past, but I think that's important to regain the opportunity of casual conversation. And I'm learning, because I've got this square in my head, I'm learning to be more aware of when there's opportunities or moments in a conversation where I can take it from casual into meaningful, or when the person I'm speaking with is taking it to that place, and move from the meaningful into the spiritual. And I'm also inspired, I guess, and liberated by this idea of the intentional square for conversations. I'm praying much more often that I will be intentional and aware in my conversations. And I'm praying specifically for certain people and for opportunities in conversation with them. I'm praying that being aware of being present with people in this particular way will lead to many, many more conversations of discovery, as people see whom the Jesus that I know and love and follow is, and how much he loves them. So what do you make of this? I think it'd be a great thing for you to talk about around your kitchen table, in your life groups, in your ministry teams. And if you think there might be something in what Jesus has modelled, something in this four-sided intentional conversation square, then I want to give you a challenge that's been given to us who've been travelling in this small group together. I want to give you the challenge to find 2 opportunities this week, before next Sunday, to take a conversation, a casual conversation you are in, into a meaningful place. So look for 2 opportunities where you can intentionally take a casual conversation into a conversation that is meaningful. So from the, hi, how are you going, into the, hey, what's the last few months been like for you place. I encourage you to share that with your life group. Share it with Josh or with myself. We'd love to hear from you, how you go with that challenge. As we come to the end of the message today, we're actually going to hear from Joyce Arnott. She's one of the people who are involved in the small group here at LBC, thinking about how we become a church that is characterised by being a people who disciple each other and others to faith. We're going to hear from Joyce Arnott about some of the things that she has learned and is practicing when it comes to intentional conversations in her relationships and her networks.
Hi LBC, I'm here to share a little bit about my journey and experiences with discipleship. I've been meeting with a group of people here to look at what it looks like to become a disciple and to build a discipleship culture at LBC and in our own communities. We've been looking at how we can share the Bible with the people around us, and also how we can help encourage and empower others to share the good news of Jesus. I really love what Karen shared last week on Sunday about Jesus' way of discipling people, where he journeyed with them and discipled them to conversion and to a faith in him, rather than what our Western way is converting someone and then discipling them after. And we've been exploring how to do that. How do we share the good news of Jesus? How do we read the Bible with people and we journey with them to conversion and to a faith in Jesus? I've started intentionally meeting with a friend of mine. I haven't yet had the courage to ask her if she wants to read the Bible with me yet, but I'm seeking the Holy Spirit around that and asking for him to prompt me when the right time is to ask that. But I continue to meet with her regularly and look at ways that I can bring our conversation into a more meaningful and a deeper sense, and hopefully into a spiritual sense. It's quite a step in faith, and I have a lot of fear around that. I fear being rejected. I fear that I won't be able to do a good job, and that they won't want to be my friend anymore. But in the Bible, Jesus says to go and make disciples of all people in Matthew 28:19. And discipling people and sharing the good news of Jesus isn't just for our pastors and our leadership staff or our life group leaders. It's actually for each and every one of us. It's us ordinary people as we go about our ordinary day, that we are looking for ways that we can share the good news of Jesus. And we do that in ways where we love one another and we serve. But what about ways that we can be really explicit? We can ask people to journey with them and we can read the Bible with them. So we've been exploring that as a group, about how we build a discipleship culture, and then how do we make disciples? How do we build a culture that means that multiplies and other people want to actually be a disciple too. As a follower of Jesus, I'm not always comfortable in sharing the Bible with other people. And the triangle model that Karen shared on Sunday is a really good check for me, to look at ways that I am meeting with God up, where I'm meeting with others in, and where I'm meeting with others out. And it's usually the out one that I really struggle with. So I'm really challenged as we explore this idea of discipleship and making disciples, and I hope you are too.